Hello everyone and welcome to another in our series of In Conversations with Lawyers. I'm delighted today to be chatting with Alicia Loh, who graduated in law from Cambridge and then stayed on to do the LLM at Cambridge, and then since then became a trainee and now an associate at Shearman Sterling. Thanks very much for doing this, Alicia.
Thanks very much for having me on, David.
Perhaps we could start by you outlining the stages of your route to qualification, because they were slightly different from what others may have heard of.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, my route was a little bit different. I know typically people try to do all the vacation scheme and training contract stuff in the second year. But what happened for me was that I only really realized I wanted to become a lawyer in my second year. So it was in my third year that I did the bulk of my applications, including my vacation scheme. I did my vacation scheme in Easter of my third year at Shearman. And I got the offer to start my LPC and then training contract right away. But I decided that I wanted to defer it to take up the opportunity of the LLM. So that's the Master of Law at Cambridge, because I had received a full scholarship. So that's a slightly more unusual thing that I did.
And just while we're talking about the LLM, and not just to offer a genuine insight, did that give you personally anything additionally that you found useful, or generally for those listening to consider an LLM? What's your thoughts on doing an LLM?
So I think that this is a very personal decision. For me, I really did not have to do it at all because I'd already had my job offer and things like that. But I had a very strong personal motivation to do it, which is that I wanted to see a lot more law than I felt that I could have done reasonably in the undergraduate course. So that fourth year gave me the opportunity to have more subjects and go into some in a bit more detail. And I don't think that the LLM is strictly necessary for a legal career. Most lawyers don't have an LLM, especially in London, but it has come in useful. For example, one of my training contract seats was an antitrust, and I had done a competition law module, competition law subject during my master's. And even for things like pro bono, I had done an intellectual property course, two of them actually, that came in quite handy for that. So generally speaking, I do think it's valuable for your career, but whether you actually do it is quite a personal choice.
Okay, that's a very good answer. Thanks for that. And again, like other candidates who follow the route into commercial law, you, I know, had slightly less direct work experience on your CV, but you had other things on your CV. Can you sort of outline what those things were and why they were subsequently value in the application and assessment process?
Yes, of course. So by way of background for those watching, I had a 2-week long internship at a law firm outside of the UK, and that was basically it for my direct legal experience. I'd done various other bits, including an internship at a central bank in not the legal department, but the economics department. And my general approach of this, even after I decided I wanted to become a lawyer, was that if I am going to become a lawyer, I'm going to be doing law for the rest of my life, especially like something like commercial law. So I wanted to have that sort of like mix of experience, get a feel of different industries and different ways of working while I could. And I thought, as I said, even after I decided I wanted to be a lawyer, that it's probably better to have different perspectives, different experiences, rather than just a standard lawyer doing 5 vacation schemes approach. And I think that serves me very well. During my undergraduate degree, I was involved in policy making. I did actually do law society, so I was the editor of Pro and Curiam, and I also founded a venture capital and private equity society. It's actually now slightly larger than the law society, but that's generally what I did.
And that's founding that society was quite a significant undertaking for someone at that stage of studies. Did that come up very much at interviews subsequently? Were your interviewers interested in you doing that?
It didn't actually come up, not to my memory anyway, but I did write about it quite a bit in my application. So I suspect that maybe they just had enough information that they didn't want to ask me about it at interview. But I will say that I did express an interest in private equity law and stuff like that during my interview. So that, in terms of when they wanted to invite me, that was probably a good sort of support.
Mm. And what about developing commercial awareness then? Maybe that helped you or not, but was that sort of confidence around commercial issues from your experience quite important for you, do you think?
Yeah, that was very important. I had the opportunity to speak to one of the graduate recruitment staff, and he specifically said he had been impressed by my sense of commercial awareness. And I know that's a very woolly term that's not necessarily helpful, but that does go to show how important it is. Seeing my sort of like society experience, society as into university society is not world. That sort of experience definitely played a part, and I did a lot of reading of the news and things like that as well.
Mm. And you're quite right to call it a woolly subject, but I think at least, if nothing else, you went in quite confident that at the level you did understand things, it would make an impression, it would be sufficient for you.
Yeah, definitely. And I think what's really important about this is not knowing exactly what's going on in the world or even like very specific economic points, but generally having an understanding of the various issues and considerations that go into something.
Mm. I mean, we're about to finish sort of talking about applications and assessments, students get very hung up on how they have to pack their CVs and their profiles with as many things as possible and do a whole range of things which are obviously the right things to do or seem to be. You're very much, I think, saying that you can go with what you've got as long as you make the most of it.
Yeah, absolutely. My CV, I don't think it was a typical law applicant CV. And in the process of me helping various people apply, I've seen a lot of them myself, and mine looks very different. Absolutely, you're right. To make the most of what you've got, and I don't think there's such a thing as doing the right things. Certain things do look better than others, but if you make the most of what you have, right, you're showing them that, look, this is who I am as an individual, this is what I have, and I can use these skills to become a good lawyer and a good asset to your team.
That's a great way of putting it. Thanks. Given that, can you offer any insights into how it is to transition to the workplace from being a Cambridge student, particularly as you did 2 degrees? What's the sort of things to be ready for and mindful of, which might well come up in assessment interviews, but how is it transitioning to the workplace from being a student?
Yeah, I think that's quite a big shift. I was actually asked something about this at my interview about, how do I think the transitioning will go. I think one, transitioning from studying to working is a whole thing, but also transitioning specifically as a Cambridge student might be a little bit tricky in the sense that I think a lot of us we are slight perfectionists and we might take criticism fairly hard. So I think that moving into the workplace, that's something new to learn, that you really need to develop a thick skin. I think as a Cambridge student, thinking about how many essays, or law anyway, how many essays you hand in every term. We get feedback maybe like once, twice a week. So that's there's opportunity for us to really absorb what's happening, think about it, and then go on to our next output, which is our next essay, right? But when you're working, especially in a really fast-paced, fairly intense environment like commercial or corporate law, and there's not always the opportunity for that. You send out one email and then you've got like 10 other things and 10 other tasks to get onto. And you just sort of need to get used to the idea that you're going to make mistakes, and you're going to make lots of them even in the span of one day. But it's about how you go from them, like how you handle them, how you pick yourself up, and also like what you do the next time you need to send out a similar email or do a similar task. I think one other thing that's really important that I was told quite early on in my career was that as a student, if you mess up, the only person that's really affected is going to be yourself and like your grades, your transcript at the end of the day. But in a working environment, like there is actually a team, and at the end of the line, there is actually a client depending on you. So even if you make mistakes, you own up to them, and it's fine. Like most mistakes are completely fixable. Yeah.
Thanks. That's very reassuring. And while we're on this subject, and someone who's become an associate, how does being a trainee prepare you then to become an associate? Is it another step change, or are there specific things you just have to bear in mind at that point?
Yeah, I think that there is definitely another step up there. With the firm that I'm at, we do give trainees quite a lot of responsibility. Quite a lot of responsibility, and the tasks that trainees do can often be quite full on, quite complex. So work-wise, it shouldn't actually be that big of a step if you have been taking on that responsibility. But it's that sense of ownership, because as a trainee, even if you might be in charge of something, but there's always somebody watching over your shoulder. And at the end of the day, you're a trainee and somebody else is an associate, and everybody understands that. But the moment you qualify, a thing can literally be yours and hanging on your shoulders. So even if I could be, working the same number of hours as a trainee, obviously I had quite a high sense of responsibility, but I was also thinking, okay, what do I need to get done today to make sort of like my job easier, things like that. But when I qualified, it was a lot more that, okay, I actually don't need to do this now, but this is my work stream and I want to push it forward. So there's a bit more of that going on as well.
I hadn't thought to ask you this before, but it's just suddenly come into my mind. When you were going through your traineeship, obviously you were thinking of which department to qualify into and who to work with. How did you go about making that decision, which is something that students don't often hear about? How do you sort of project your future in a firm? Who do you talk to? What do you consider? Have you got a few insights on that?
Yeah, so there are a couple of considerations. One is that when you are applying for vacation schemes and training contracts, presumably you tend to lean towards firms that do more of what you're interested in. For example, if you're interested in like intellectual property law, probably you don't want to apply to a big, a commercial law firm. So hopefully you are more interested in your firm's core practices anyway. So that's that, and I generally was. So I ended up doing finance, M&A, financial institutions advisory, and financial regulation, which is an extremely long name, and also antitrust. So the first two are my firm's core practices, and the others I was just thinking about, okay, what's different? With the first two, they were very heavily transactional, and I just wanted to experience something else different, really. And I'd been told by quite a few people that I might enjoy FIA. So I tried that. And with antitrust, I just found the work generally really interesting. I've done master's subject in competition. So it was something that I was quite interested in learning more. So everybody takes these things differently, but for me, it was genuinely guided by what I thought I could want a career in. And I know that's very hard to figure out, but hopefully, through speaking to people at your firm or even at other places, including friends, you get a better feel for these things.
Well, I'm glad we touched on that, because I think it's something that's not often sort of brought up. So thanks very much for your insights. Just as we come towards the end, you very kindly offered to provide some more insights into disability and the legal profession. And I wonder what you would advise students to look for in, say, law firms that offer significant support, or any other things to take advantage of if you're in that position and you're interested in the law?
Yes, thanks for that, David. It's very important to me that disabled people can see lots of representation in different industries. As a law student, I hadn't really seen that, to be honest. I hadn't seen many or any disabled lawyers. And the first time I saw somebody, a disabled lawyer in a commercial, really fast-paced sort of role, sort of triggered me to look into this further. So that is something really important to me. And I think the message that I sort of want to send out is that if you're really interested in something, don't let a health condition or a disability stop you. Because at the end of the day, like, there are lots of accommodations, lots of support that can and should be put in place. And I know that it's easier said than done when you are a student sort of scrambling about doing lots of applications. But really look at the firm, and if they are not willing to offer you support, it's not a firm that you want to work at anyway. In terms of finding that's very difficult. Not difficult as in impossible, but it's just hard to figure out. Lots of firms might have a sort of disability policy on the website. Some do, some don't. I wouldn't really take that as any sort of indicator, simply because I've experienced firms that seem great on the outside, but speaking to people on the inside, not that great. I've also had firms that they literally don't say anything, but they turn out to be wonderfully supportive. So unfortunately, no easy way to do this. You really need to get to know the firm. As an applicant, I think one thing you can do is actually go through the process, and you will know if you need certain accommodations. For example, during my application process, I couldn't write with a pen, so I had to, use a laptop or a keyboard, those sort of things. How supportive are they of those sort of arrangements? And hopefully you'll get a feel for it. It's not the most scientific method, but hopefully this gives you some sort of barometer. And also reach out to people. Like, lots of people are more than willing to chat about these. Feel free to find me on LinkedIn, message me. And also there's a great charity that I've personally spoken to, work with. I've got friends working there now as well. It's called City Disabilities. So City Disabilities is a great charity whereby they pair students or mentees with mentors in that field, and they try to get you matched with somebody as close to your condition or your industry interest as possible. There are actually lots of lawyers working at that firm, so if you're a law applicant, great place to go.
That's been good and really helpful advice. I think we'll wrap up now, Alicia, but before we do you have any sort of a final insight, a last piece of the best careers advice you were given, or the careers advice you'd like to give to the students listening?
Yeah, I think I could sum it up in basically 2 lines. One, which is make the most of what you've got. Don't be afraid to just put yourself out there and show that you are a really strong applicant. And then the second thing, completely forgot my second thing. The second thing that I was going to say is that you're going to make lots of mistakes along the way. When you're applying, when you're interviewing, in your actual career as well. And it's completely fine. It's how you handle that situation, how you move on, how you learn from it, that really counts.
I think that's great. I think we've really got a sense of just how the legal profession really focuses on not perfection, but the pragmatic, the practical, making the best of what you've got and supporting your team as much as possible. So I think that's been a great impression that you've left us with.
Thank you, David.
Thanks very much, Alicia.